And this is so we have 2 years of stuff planned out, and it's kind of a perfect amount for me. It's a lot of work, but it's not like undoable with my other jobs. It keeps me doing some comic stuff, and then I get to do the covers, and just and oh man, I just all I do like for work now is watch Gatchaman, and I have to buy the toys because it helps me with reference. Yeah.
Hey, thanks for listening to the Tradecraft podcast. I'm Alex. Well, what kind of kicked this whole podcast thing off 4.5 years ago was a art residency my wife took in Ireland, and she was gone for a while. So this is pre-pandemic, and hopped online with some art college friends, and we were hanging out, talking, drawing, and then we just kept hanging out with kind of new people, and time goes by, and it became a podcast. She left this last week for another art residency, which is great. So she'll be off exploring her creative powers. And I promise I won't start another podcast, but in the interest of, holding up my end on just keeping life as uncomplicated as possible, I pulled a ton of boxes out that I have been meaning to attend to. So the house is a wreck. It is just covered with all sorts of things. And I think she would just explode into atoms if she saw this. But my philosophy has always been you have to make a big mess before you can clean it up. Yeah, it seems to be my full part-time job. This week's guest is Tommy Lee Edwards. And Tommy is, the guy. Everyone knows Tommy Lee's work. He done amazing projects over the years, and not just in comic books, but in games and in television. He's just kind of a Renaissance person. I've been on his case for a while, have him on the show. And then when I got wind he was sort of spearheading the comic book effort by Mad Cave for the Gatchaman property, I kind of lost my mind, because this was a cartoon that I fell in love with in the late 70s. So I quickly emailed him and said, you have to come on and we have to talk about this. Tommy is a gearhead, loves cars, loves planes, loves motorcycles. I'm probably his biggest fan on Instagram for all his car stuff. So he's just a really interesting cat. So I hope you enjoyed this conversation. I sure as hell did. This is me with Tommy Lee Edwards. Were you the kid who just had all these things in the room growing up?
Yeah.
Yeah. And was it just an endless battle between you and your, for me, it was my mother to like, put it away, put that away.
I was pretty organized,
Really?
actually. So yeah, which is why I still have a lot of my stuff.
Right. Okay.
I have most of my Star Wars and GI Joe,
Okay.
and Mask,
Mm-hmm.
but only like some things. So Mask I've put and set up in my garage. My garage is what my wife calls the hobby house. I'm in the studio, which is the workhouse,
Mm-hmm.
and they're all separate from the live-in house. So the hobby house has some of my collection. So the studio right now where I am has all like my Godzillas and a lot of airplane stuff and robots and shit like that. And then my garage has my Speed Racer collection and my Batmobile collection and and my mask stuff. So it's kind of an automotive theme going there.
It makes complete sense to me.
Yeah,
It would confuse you. Now you need an aircraft hangar to put all the planes in.
that's right.
It doesn't have to be a big one, just like one of those regular size ones for like a Cessna.
Regular size,
um,
average homeowner size.
yeah, right, exactly. Um, Yeah, it's what was the fascination? Was it the moving vehicles for you first, or was it, I mean, because for me, I didn't get a chance to see any sort of exotic animation until maybe when I went to, like, Detroit on a family trip and saw Speed Racer for the first time, like, in the early '70s,
Oh,
you know?
yeah. I Speed Racer was the first anime I ever saw for sure. Um, and um, I think, and my dad was an engineer, and my mom worked at the GM Proving Grounds. So it was always, and my grandpa worked at Cadillac, and my mom and my aunt worked at Ford, and my uncles worked at either GM or Ford, depending.
Mhm,
So everybody kind of you know did all that kind of stuff all the time, and so yeah, animation and toys that were cars. I played with Tonka, but Tonka made trucks that were not like construction trucks, but like 4x4
mhm,
kind of trucks, and then you had like a guy that was like a 6-inch tall guy who could sit in it, and you could make jumps and
mhm,
everything, and so it was. Oh, let me turn off my text here. But yeah, it was a lot of like those kinds of toys. But I like characters, so that's where like I think GI Joe was a big thing
mhm,
because it was that mix of the vehicles with the
yeah.
characters. When you could do more like stories more.
Yeah, there was that weird gap because, like, when I was little, like, little, like, up to about, like, 5 or 6 years old-ish, that's when the big GI Joes were out, and then that kind of, like, disappeared, and then, like, kinda Mego, like, took the
Hmm.
marketplace, but, like, with, when they went from 12 inches to 8 inches, and then they kind of reigned for, for the '70s, and then they just kind of disappeared in the tail end of, like, the Star Wars toys, the Micronauts, and then the '80s were ruled by the GI Joe figures.
Yeah, the 3.5 inches.
I mean, listen, it's a business. They're like, why, like, we can make just as much profit off of this 3.5 inch thing than a 12-inch thing.
Yeah, those are. I had ones from my uncle of the tall GI
Hmm.
Joes, but I didn't. And I had a couple, but they were already, yeah, they were phasing out, when I
Right.
was, and so 1983, I think, when the small GI Joes were started to come out,
Okay.
maybe 82. So I think it was 83. So I was in 83, I would have been 10.
Oh, you're like the perfect age.
Yeah. So that was, and then the comic came out,
Hmm.
and that was my first monthly comic collection
Oh,
too. Like I bought comics all the time, but that was the first one that I was like counting down the weeks, and the days and
totally.
the until I could go to the corner store and get the next issue.
Yeah. Well, so for me, it definitely was the Micronauts, and it was for the same reason. There were
Yeah.
toys that you could
Yeah.
you could sort of like carry on the story in your own mind between issues.
Yeah, it was that kind of stuff that you could draw your own stories, draw your own characters, read the comic, watch the cartoon, play with the toys inside, outside, and then play war outside, which is what I did all the
Sure.
time as a kid.
All the time.
Yeah, so dressing up with all the army gear and
Yep.
going out there, and so I mean, I still have, like I said, I was so organized. Kept all these drawings I did that me and a good friend of mine, Mike Bowman, when we were little, we would just draw all the time, uh and draw each other's characters, and like Dungeons and Dragons, how you
Hmm.
come up with your character and all that stuff. It was like that. We would come up with our characters but never play Dungeons and Dragons.
Right. No, totally. I know. I think, like, I got my hands on the D&D books like in the late '70s. Yeah, figured out how to weasel that deal from a parent, and then, like, I had them, but, like, it was impossible to wrap my brain about, like, how I'm going to, like, organize this. But I
Yeah.
could sit there and draw those characters. I'm like, oh, I could draw a knight. I could draw like a monster. That was cool.
Yeah.
Yeah.
My son got super into Dungeons and Dragons and still plays. He's 25 now.
Hmm.
So that was like, a huge part of his life. And he got into a lot of the vintage stuff and got a lot of the old books and everything from John Paul Leon had all the old stuff too.
Yeah.
And him and his brother Alex, played all the time. And JP gave my son Henry all of his old books and everything
Yeah.
years ago, and it was awesome. It was like just the ultimate treasure, you know.
Yeah.
So sometimes, yeah, keeping that stuff is like, my wife doesn't keep hardly anything. She just wants me to throw everything out, you know. But
Hmm.
sometimes, it might be, it's fun to. There are some things I'm starting to get rid of, because it's ridiculous. It's just taking up space now, you know.
Yeah. I mean, I think I've said it more than once, but most likely, most comic book creators will be found buried underneath a rubble of their own collection. It's
Yeah.
just, it's going to happen. That the shelves are really tall and they're covered with heavy objects.
Yeah, I had to build a whole new building so I could put
Right.
my car fit in it.
Yeah.
So
So, did you grow up outside of Detroit?
yeah, it was a little bit in Dearborn.
Yeah.
And where are you from?
Well, I'm from Connecticut, but my father was born and raised in actually in Dearborn and all
Oh,
those.
yeah, that's
So
right. I remember we talked about this one time a long time ago.
yeah. So I grew up, and he was an engineer, so I have a very similar sort of like
Yeah,
obsession with mechanical stuff
that's
that you do.
awesome.
Yeah. So hence, anytime you post anything with a car, I'm the one who's
Yeah, I
asking
know.
very
You're
specific
one of those.
questions.
You're one of those few guys on Instagram that actually seems to understand or give a shit what I'm posting.
Right. I mean, I'm not putting little pictures of flames and thumbs up on the responses. So, no
Yeah,
offense if you do. Carry on.
fire, fire.
Yeah, but
Um,
yeah. So you had this sort of like, and by the way, the Detroit television stations had the best cartoons.
hmm
Like I said, that's where Speed Racer. So you and I saw the same
Yeah, we lucked
stuff.
out.
Yeah.
I have a guy I work with right now, who's the marketing guy at the company that I'm making this video game for. He always talks about certain shows, and he grew up in Toronto, and he was like, "Oh my god, I didn't know." I don't, he didn't meet a lot of people that knew the same shows that he did, and a lot of it was stuff like Speed Racer and you know, Star Blazers,
Ultraman. You guys had
Ultraman.
Ultraman.
Yeah, Ultraman, Johnny Sacco and his flying robot,
Mm-hmm.
or giant robo. Ultraman is a huge one, and
Oh
that's
yeah.
still to this day my that's I have my Ultraman collection in my house. That's one of the things I have in my house, and my Common Rider collection.
Okay.
Um, so yeah, I have problems, but yeah, that's one of the few things that my wife is allowed to have in
Okay.
the house. So um, partly because Ultraman and Common Rider are more like colorful kinds of things.
Mm-hmm.
And for a while, like, our living room was very dark. I had like, a lot of dark art. I had a Bob Peak, original Bob Peak, drawing a comp of Rollerball,
Oh wow.
and it was all like a lot of like. So we made a conscious effort to brighten up our the inside of our house. So now I actually just recently dropped off last week an original Ultraman Returns poster from 1973 to get framed. And it's being framed with like a red and silver and all this stuff, so to go in the house.
That's
So I
cool.
got that when I was in Japan a few months ago.
Oh right. I remember you were posting just a long list of images from that trip.
Yeah,
Well,
that was awesome,
was it
man.
a work trip or that was just go to
No, it
Japan?
was for fun,
Okay.
and I went with a couple friends, and I've always wanted to go. And my dad used to go when I was little, for different, car manufacturers he was working with. And then my first job was I worked at a Japanese stamping plant in Michigan, and it was um, so my dad would also work for that company and then would go to Japan, and I always wanted to go. And the sport I played my whole life was judo, so we always had a lot of ties to Japanese stuff. And then my dad would bring like manga back from Japan, and like anime books, like books about
Mm-hmm.
shows and stuff. So he knew what I liked, so he would come home with all that kind of stuff. Then my mom would go through it, and she would, with scissors, cut out anything that was questionable, like nudity, and anything that was too violent and
Sure.
stuff, which drove me absolutely nuts. But I guess you gotta.
I mean, she's being a parent.
Yeah, and she was committed. That's a commitment.
Yeah, yeah, for sure.
Speaking of the stuff like the TV shows in Detroit, we would rent movies and pirate them, like to put two VCRs
Hmm.
together and get like, let's say, RoboCop. And when it was about, and so we would record it, but then my mom would watch it and do the same thing. She would then RoboCop would be playing, and right when Ed 209 is about to blow that guy away
Hmm.
in the meeting, all of a sudden the picture would get real fuzzy and it would go into like TV. So it would be like the news or cartoons or whatever was on at the time. My mom would record over that scene and get rid of that scene, and then would go back to the movie. So yeah, she put a lot of work into.
Wow. But you know what's so funny is thinking about that. Like, if there is a single movie, especially from the 80s, that actually seems like an additive effect,
Mhm.
like that movie is that's actually like, you know what I mean?
Yeah, I'd buy that for $1
Yeah.
when it showed up
Right,
all of a
right,
sudden.
right. It's like it's almost like because like when Frank did wrote was it RoboCop 2, it had a lot more ads crammed in there, and that just feels like on point for the.
Yeah,
So tell your
that's funny.
hats off to your mom for being on brand with her editorial.
So yeah, it was good. It was it was and, I loved the comics, and like when I was in junior high, I think I got more into, like X-Men and
Hmm.
stuff like that, and then into high school, and it was more like that Chris Claremont, JR Jr., Paul Smith, that
Yeah.
80s stuff, and then I loved that How to Draw Comics the Marvel Way book,
Hmm.
and all that kind of stuff. Just total 80s kid.
Yeah. Well, that was all. I mean, that was all these entry points, and I think one of the things you cited with your buddy, um, Mike, you said his name was,
Yeah. Uh-huh.
like you guys, you drew together, and I think it's like
Mhm.
having that confederate in these kind of these sort of fringe activities that keep you
Yeah,
engaged.
totally.
Because without that confederate, man, it just goes, well, I'll just grab a soccer ball
Yeah.
because that's what everyone else is doing. Versus like,
You're
hey,
right.
we can put our heads down and do the thing, and whatever the thing is. Like I remember senior year of high school. Yeah, I'm like 18 years old, and my buddy and I were hanging out, and like we opened up a box, and it was filled with our AFX cars. So the electric track,
Yeah,
and we
those are
like,
great.
he's like, I've got a whole box of this stuff. So we set our tracks up, and like, rather than going out, like we would sit and race these cars for like a couple of weeks. Like we're like, this was the greatest thing because we were just having the best time trying to soup them up, adding extra power converters just to see if we could get more, juice out of these things. And it was a blast. Um, but like I never would have done it had he not been hanging out with me. So
Right.
yeah, and we
Yeah.
didn't end up in jail. So that's a good bonus.
That you didn't?
Yeah,
Or you did? Oh, you didn't. Okay. I
yeah.
thought you said you did. And I was
Which
like, oh,
would
I don't know.
that's the real story. How I ended up in jail playing FX cars.
That's my grandma. Sometimes I'd get a little bit of crap from like other like my parents or relatives for having too many like comics and things. And like I mentioned, like when I worked at that stamping plant, I was way too young. I was because my dad worked for the company. I was able to, kind of sneak in there,
Hmm.
um, and I was literally in eighth grade. So, um, and I would do everything from landscaping to driving a fork truck.
Yeah.
So I would just I got $5 an hour, so this is 1987 or whatever. So I was loaded, so I I would just buy comics like crazy. And my grandma always said, "Well, at least he's not, buying drugs or doing something stupid.
Right.
He's going and working, and what's he buying? Comics. He's reading and using his imagination and feeling his drawing stuff." And
Hmm.
so yeah, it was definitely good hobbies.
Yeah. My
And then
first.
yeah, and you'd give them to your buddies,
Yeah.
you'd trade them.
Oh man, it
I
was the
had some
best.
really valuable GI Joes, and I traded them to Mike for some Hot Wheel cars, like an asshole.
Oh,
But
they're they're probably still worth more than Hot Wheels too.
yeah,
Yeah. Yeah. My first job was working at
strip club.
no, it was a hydraulic manifold manufacturing design and manufacturing facility that my
Oh, that's cool.
yeah, so my dad being an engineer, that was he worked for this company. So I was like operating, like heavy industrial machinery
Jeez.
and assembling these things at 14. Like that was my
Whoa.
that was my little job, and I did that all the way through 16. So it
Oh,
was
that's awesome.
it was great. And hanging out
And it's
with
great to be around adults, like
yes,
grown-ups and stuff, and yeah,
who aren't your
yeah,
family,
yeah, yeah,
who will swear around you and not like go, oh, um, like
yeah,
they behave as they do, and you have to adapt.
yeah, and it gave I think it gave I'm sure, I mean, it did for me, but probably gave you a lot of skills on how to, deal with people and, in general, and
Hmm.
then when you got more like, uh then I because then I had a terrible job, but then I went and worked at Burger King for a little bit, and I had to deal with adults there, and I was like, that didn't last long.
Yeah.
Uh, but and then I worked at the movie theater as the projectionist, and I never left upstairs. I was like, we had uh, 5 or 6 screens, and so I ran all of them, and just kind of was like the phantom, up
Hmm.
there, and never left. So
Nice.
that was a good job too. That was in the old days when you had to loop it all up and everything in the big platters and
Right.
splice the reels together. That was great.
And wait for the mark.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's awesome. I love
Listen
that.
to us old guys talking about this old
Hey
stuff.
man, here's the funny thing. So when I left comic books in the late, well, I guess in 1999, 2000, I got into design and art direction. And it was so weird that I had as by osmosis, by doing, color guides for my own work, understood how the printing process worked. Like I
Hmm.
understood how things were made in the world to begin with, but I could apply my understanding of that. So when it came to working on Photoshop or any of these things and going to putting an object together that needed to be produced, I had a head start. I had no idea that I had a head start until I'm like, oh, this is the same thing. Like that C2, that I would mark down on that color guide, that's just cyan and it's 50%. Okay, I get this. And I understood overprinting and all these crazy things. But, when you're doing the comic books, no one's pulling you aside, or at least no one pulled me aside and said, okay, well, here's what this means and here's what this is doing.
Yeah.
It was more of like, this is how you code it. I'm like, oh, okay, cool. Because I wanted to color my own stuff. I didn't want to have to rely on somebody else for coloring it in case, you know, well,
Yeah.
um,
I'm still that way.
yeah, right. So it was just like it was an interesting kind of transition kind of period. Um, so yeah, anything you learn, you can kind of change and apply to whatever the next thing you do
Hmm.
if you pay attention.
Yeah. The job that I've been at the last 2 years as creative director of this company called Atmos Labs, and we're making this game. And a big part of the game is you're able to customize this gear that your characters use in the game,
Hmm.
and it all comes from like my way to relate to it is my car hobby. So it's all about customizing these pieces, fitting them together. How do they work? How do they stay together? How do they, all the just even today we're coming up with some new ideas, and so much of it goes back to what I learned on my car stuff. So yeah, it's cool to be able to apply it to other places.
Well, it's that thing like it's like why Jeeps are so popular, right?
Mm,
Because people can buy a Jeep
modular.
and they can do whatever they want to it.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think that if you can apply that a lot, I mean, that's like the age old battle between the PC and the Mac. Like, well, I can do what I want. I can customize my PC. The less time I'm on the damn computer, the happier I am. But I get your point.
Yeah.
And I think that applies to anything. And if you can kind of create an avenue to allow people to personalize the things that they like and love, it's going to connect with an audience that likes to
Oh
do
yeah.
that. Yeah,
Yeah.
that makes sense to me. So, all right, where did you didn't go to you didn't fall afoul like JP and I did and end up in at SVA. So where did you go to school?
I went to Art Center in
Oh,
Pasadena,
okay.
and so I went to the West Coast.
The cool
So,
school.
well, when I was in Detroit area, I was lucky enough to have a good private teacher,
Hmm.
an illustrator who mostly did advertising and automotive stuff. And that was my other job in high school. Was when I was in like 10th grade, I started teaching classes at his studio to kids, and he really helped me get my portfolio together. And when I found out that so many of my favorite artists, like at that time, like I it was so great knowing someone. His name was Ed Hubert, and knowing Ed, I could, you know, like Bill Sienkiewicz, I would say, "Oh my god, I love this stuff," and I would show Ed, and he would say, "Oh, if you like this, you'll like Bob Peak.
Right.
You'll like Bernie Fuchs. You'll like, And so Ed was my first step towards, uh, history of American illustration,
Hmm.
really. And and I had the Superman, the motion picture, the Star Trek, the motion picture, which I'm wearing a Bob Peak shirt right
There you
now.
go. See.
Yeah, so I had those posters on my wall as a kid, so when I found out he went to art center, and Ralph McQuarrie went to art center, and and all these kind of guys that I idolized, so of course, I was excited about going to California and,
Hmm.
and doing that, so
Did you
I
go?
ended up changing my
Did,
major though to film.
oh,
But
really?
yeah, so I end up kind of like using both of my, you know different kinds of education all the time now,
Hmm.
so which is pretty fun.
What made you jump over to film? Like, what was the?
I think it was the how much I love telling
Hmm.
stories, and drawing and painting and stuff. I wasn't as interested in like techniques and stuff like that,
Hmm.
and I wasn't, and this was just as right before computers started to become a thing.
Right.
As far as like now everybody, at art center is designing, and painting in the computer, so um for me it was all, I mean, once you get into like your fifth term, but the first couple of years at art center is all very drawing and painting from the model, very traditional. And after I had finished those first couple of years, um where my interests led were more writing and like making films and storytelling, and I was getting work already doing like storyboards and stuff like that.
Hmm.
So I don't know, my interests were really in that area. So I don't know. Then I went and did, another couple of years with film stuff, and then I was so broke, that I just would take a term off and work, and then eventually I just never went back. So I never finished.
Oh,
I
okay.
I finished. What was it? 8 terms would be 4 years. I did 7 terms.
Oh,
so
geez.
and I just, yeah. So I just basically was like, well, do I need the piece of paper? And I decided to just, I was at the time doing a lot of stuff for Disney and some record companies, and then starting to do some comics and everything. And then after a while, I decided that, at the time, before we got married, now my now wife Melissa, when she moved out to LA and finished her school at Cal State Northridge, and then we eventually decided, we wanted certain things in life, like, um, to be able to afford a house and have some land and have kids and things like that we wanted out of our life together. And we decided that we would do better with that, potentially leaving LA.
Hmm.
So, which I didn't think I would want to do as a teenager. You think all that's where all the magic is going to happen.
Yeah.
And so I don't know, I visited, some other comic creators that I had met at conventions. I visited them in North Carolina. It was, Casey Jones and Mike
Hmm.
Rowingo and John Van Fleet, and just a handful of guys.
Yeah.
And so I was able to visit them, and I had memories of going through North Carolina as a kid on trips. Um, and I thought, well, yeah, let's give it a shot for a year, and that was in 1996. So,
Okay.
so, so it's been a long time. This is the longest I've ever lived anywhere.
Yeah.
So it's
Yeah.
been
It's
pretty
funny how
cool.
you can look at that and go, "Oh boy, this is like." Yeah, like we moved to Asheville, and my wife was like, "Oh, like we'll do 2 years here, and then we'll figure something else out." That was 12 years ago. So it just happens.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's kind of huge. I was thinking about like you were talking about, doing storyboard work and advertising work and all these kinds of gigs. And you just remember, I just think like how hard it is to remember how we did all that stuff because we like what we have available now as far as our ability to communicate with one another and
Hmm.
sort of like through text and emails and mobile calls. Like back then, it was like at your house on your landline making phone calls. If you had a fax machine, you were like ahead of the game.
Oh yeah.
It was such a thing. Like, and you just had to like do all of this hustle. And I think a lot of soft skills come into play where you just learn to talk to people and get
Yeah, for sure.
and get to the thing that you need.
And how to kind of like help each other out too. Like I take I, I was so lucky to have not only in school and certain teachers. I had Bern Hogarth was one of my teachers in school, which was huge, and certain guys that will make this huge impact. But then outside of school, I met Howard Chaykin
Hmm.
and Walter Simonson. And Walter was speaking of the fax machine. He was like, "You need a fax machine," and he got a new one, and he gave me his old one.
Oh.
And so and then but he lives in New York,
Hmm.
so he shipped it in the mail with a fax machine to me in LA. And
Wow.
like, what a nice guy. And it was great because we were always faxing each other stuff.
Hmm.
And then I'd go to like one of their houses, like I would be faxing stuff to JP like in 93 or something, and then I'd go to New York and see that fax hanging on his
On the
wall, and I was like,
wall.
it doesn't look anything like
No,
that in real
no, I remember,
life.
like, all the stuff that I would fax, like, so,
Yeah.
like, Dave Johnson and I would fax a lot of stuff to each other, and, like, Dave's got he's got a bold line, and, like, I
Yeah.
don't have the same kind of bold line, and I'm like, "Oh, like, this makes it look fat," it's missing stuff, like, all these things that the fidelity wasn't there, and it's so funny because Casey, I bumped into him at a show and he he was like hanging out with me. He looked at my book and he's like pointed at a piece I had in my book. He's like, "Wait, you did this?" And I was like, "Yeah." He's like, "I've had a copy of this on my wall for like 3 years." And I'm like, "Oh," like so like there was such a black market of like just people handing people
Oh,
other
yeah.
stuff that who knew what you got. It was
Yeah.
fun. It was fun.
Oh, for sure. I mean, I had a studio with Howard and Mike Vosberg and Sean McManus and Steve Mitchell, and Steve Rude would come over all the time, and
Hmm.
all these guys would just kind of like, leave stuff and trade stuff, give each other stuff, so we had Xeroxes of all all this
Yeah.
stuff. And I have all these really awesome Xeroxes. I have such a huge Toth collection
You wait a
because it's
minute.
stuff
What's his
it,
name? What was that guy's name?
John Hitchcock or somebody like
No, there
that,
was a
or
dude who went around at San Diego, and he had a great sketchbook with amazing pieces in it. And what he would do is
yeah.
he would mail you all of those Toth sheets.
Oh yeah, Daryl something maybe.
Something, yeah. And like
Yeah,
he's like, listen, you know, do whatever you want in this. Just don't copy these and give these other people. And I was like,
yeah.
all right, cool. And I kept my promise on that one until like a year and a half ago. And I finally just emailed somebody like the PDF. I made a PDF of the whole thing. And
Oh, cool.
but I'm like, I think the statute of limitations is long over at this point. Um
Yeah. Now you can get all that stuff in a book,
well,
where
it's
back then we'd be digging through dusty back issue bins
mhm,
and all that stuff. I would have a list of what Toth books to try and find, and
right.
just go to random comic shops and just dig and try and find stuff. Now you can just look it up online and somebody's already posted it in
Sure.
HD. So it's pretty funny.
Yeah. No, it
Um,
is. I mean, it's a, and like, I don't begrudge it at all because, like, listen, it's great to have access to when someone like,
yeah,
because remember when you like, someone's like, oh, there's this band, and you're like, it was just this huge effort to try to find music from random bands or whatever
yeah.
back when you had to like physically walk around and do this stuff. But now anything is accessible, which is great because you're never kind of late to the game. You can kind of get on board.
There's a really cool joke. I can't remember the comedian's name, but he was on Conan a lot years ago, and then he had his own show like after Conan. And he did these things where he does like kind of a joke on Christian Bale's Batman, where talks like this, and
Hmm.
yeah, I can't remember his name, but he did this really kind of long kind of story joke about how he met his basically he had a Tom Petty concert shirt on, and he met another person with that same shirt or a similar shirt or whatever, and it spawned a whole kind of friendship, and that ended up where then well it gosh somehow it ended up where he discovered Tom Petty in the first place, like years
Okay.
ago when he was. And so that's how he discovered the music, blah blah blah, and all these kinds of things. And then it ended up where then he years later, someone wearing that same shirt or something, and eventually, long story short, it's how he met his wife
Oh, wow.
ultimately. So it was like this really cool thing on just from a T-shirt, and then he found this music, and then found these relationships, and then he ended up meeting someone, and and he wouldn't have experienced that by just looking online.
Hmm.
It was a real world thing, and that's the kind of stuff that I value from those. Like when I think about digging through those back issues, and we all know the smell of that
Hmm.
newsprint, and my allergies are starting to go off, just like a Pavlovian response, but it's it's such a cool, like, and you meet people, and you make friends, and like we're talking about, you drawing and hanging out with our friends and stuff. So as much as I love having the instant access to all these things and having the internet, nothing will ever replace that, being able to, like, one thing, my son always played online video games with people, and I was like, but I was so glad that they actually got to know each other pretty well playing, like
Hmm.
you and I talking right
Yeah.
now. And then a couple of those friends who played online, then they'd end up making that extra effort to then, let's meet up sometime,
Oh, that's
let's.
cool.
And they're in different states,
Hmm.
and I remember when they were in high school, and I just said, yeah, just they can come stay here, and whatever. And then always having that, and having that, being able to go and play D&D in person, being able to go to the comic shop and shoot the shit with the guys at the shop,
Hmm.
the stuff that I've had to force myself to. I go to the comic shop maybe like 4 times a year, and it's just so hard to get out.
Yeah.
That's why I've made it, which my wife always pushes me to make a conscious effort to, every Saturday I go hang out with the guys at the garage. I have my own stuff, but to go there and you have that social interaction and sharing ideas and learning from each other,
Yeah.
is huge.
Well, I think, I mean, and I think part of that, I think when something bites into you, you will do the thing like go to the places and go to the stores or go hunt the thing
Mm-hmm.
down. I don't think that goes away because I don't think, like, we talk about book sales a lot, and people aren't discovering a random great book on Amazon.
Mm.
It just doesn't happen. Like, unless someone you like, suggests the book and it shows up on your, however the feed, you know, feeds it to you, you
Right.
don't find it. But when you go to a bookstore, a cover catches your eye. And you're like, what's that?
Yeah.
And then
Yeah.
the shop owner's like, oh my God, that's a great book. You really, like, if you like this, you'll
Yeah.
love that. And you're like, well, I do like that. So I think I'll try this.
Mm-hmm.
And that's a big, big thing. And we have, I think, listen, there's this giant economy out there that happens in a digital form, but I don't think we will not give that up. The land, the sort of the face-to-face version of whatever the life has. I
I
hope.
hope not.
I I hope I can't. Um,
Yeah.
yeah, and it's and testament. I think many people who are into comics, or whether they make them or read them, it's their it's a collector's bug. There's this thing of like
Mm-hmm.
finding and acquiring and finding and
Mm-hmm.
acquiring that doesn't,
Yeah.
and it
The
can spread
treasure
out. Yeah,
hunt.
treasure hunting.
That was when I was in Japan. So like half my trip was devoted to hunting for things that I could never get here,
Hmm.
as far as like my collections go, so finding those old, Ultramans or Common Riders and stuff.
Right.
So, and we got way too much of that,
Yeah, I know. I mean,
so.
I remember. So with the Do you remember? Do you? I'm sure you used to go to the Books Kinokuniya up in New York when you would come up, and that
Yeah.
yeah, the one at Rockefeller Center, that like that
Yeah,
huge
that's a good one. There's one in LA that's not quite as good.
yeah, and then, so that was like I don't know 5 blocks from my apartment, so I would go there
Mm.
way too often. But
Yeah.
you would like do your research, and you'd find out like that Shiro had done like all this other stuff, and you're like, how do I get my hands on this stuff? Um,
Yeah.
yeah, it's and then you just have to save your pennies and fly to Japan apparently to get that stuff.
Yeah. It only took me, like 30 years to do it,
Yeah,
but
good timing. So how did
yeah.
you? So I mean, you get out of school and you're scrapping like for this and that and the other thing. Like, how like for you did you? How did you view things at the time? Were you just like an opportunist of saying, "I'll take whatever's coming to me that seems interesting," or can pay the rent, or were you like, "I okay, I'm out of school, I'm broke," because you had this film thing. Were you saying like, "I'm going to keep doing film," or how did you like frame it? Because like it or not, people love you for your comics. So how did that happen?
Um, yeah, I just kind of did, in the beginning, obviously you just take whatever,
Hmm.
and then as time goes on, you can, if you're fortunate enough to, especially if you can start to get a reputation of things, uh, for certain things, then you can sort of start to be a little more, uh, selective, and also not only selective on what projects you take, but who do you want to work with, all that kind of stuff. So, like in comics, for example, I think the first monthly book I ever did was this thing called Gemini Blood, and I worked with John Workman as the letterer, who I always wanted to work with.
Hmm.
And since then, John has lettered every single book I've ever done, even even books that I don't draw. If I have anything to do with it, like the Gatchaman books, I'm only writing and doing the covers. He's doing all the lettering on
Right.
the insides. There's a book that I'm doing through the game company, and John's lettering that. So there's certain people that you just gravitate to, and you know that you have to work with them on everything. But everybody, lots of people, they don't know what you're doing in another area if they don't know you really well.
Right.
And people in those other, let's say, other media, they will also, they would typecast you. So like if I was looking for a job and I was working on an animated movie and then there was a live action movie, the producers on that movie might say, well, we normally don't work with animation guys,
Hmm.
and then, or I'd go to work on an animated movie. Oh, we don't work with comic guys,
Right.
or, so my, or, oh, you're that guy that does all that, black and white kind of, ink stuff. But then I also do paintings for all these Star Wars books and novels and posters and that aren't that,
Hmm.
so I get bored really easy, and so I always like to, and also I think as a part of like a rebellious sort of, like, you can't label me, man, like when I was a kid, that I
Sure.
always just kind of like, I didn't know if I wanted to do magazines, or, which obviously I couldn't because that's not a thing anymore, but, or movie posters, which obviously isn't a thing anymore. But but I liked all that stuff,
Right.
and I didn't want to do comics to make a living. I didn't want to only do comics
Hmm.
ever. So I always like to do, I mean, while I was doing comics, I always at the same time was doing other stuff. I never ever did only comics.
Hmm.
So, but people in comics know my comics. People that I work with in video games know my video games, but they also kind of know my comics,
Yeah.
or in movies, or like just this morning I was messaging with Albert Hughes, who's one of the Hughes brothers that
Hmm.
directed the Book of Eli, and I was the concept artist on that movie. And Albert and I were talking about, a completely different project now, and we were sharing like a cinematic that I just directed for this game that's all 3D, and completely like in comics, people would have no idea that I do that stuff,
Right.
so it's all kind of relative. Um, and for a while, like I got really, really sick of comics. It finally hit me really hard, really bad. A lot of it had to do with when JP passed away,
Hmm.
but it was at that time, and I was doing Jupiter's Legacy with Mark
Yeah.
Miller for Netflix, and at that time, I just couldn't take it anymore. Before COVID, I was working as a production designer on a movie for Kerry Conran, who
Hmm.
did Sky Captain of
Yeah,
the
yeah,
World Tomorrow.
yeah. Totally. I keep wondering, like, what happened to that dude?
Yeah, yeah, he's one of those guys. He's got so many great ideas, and he just can't catch a break.
Right.
It's like, I mean, the best of the best. I mean, like Albert. Speaking of him, Albert Hughes was developing the live action Akira movie for Warner Brothers, and we worked on that. Mostly he worked on that, and I did some stuff here and there when I could fit it in. But that was a year of his life, and that fell apart.
Mm.
So that kind of stuff happens all the time. So people, like, if people, I get this all the time at conventions, they assume you're not doing anything if they don't know what you're doing.
Right. If you're not on the
So they're
shelf,
like,
then you must be
"Oh, you must be like a lazy,
right. Or
loaf,
when did?
or whatever."
Yeah. How long was that coma?
Yeah, yeah. So it's like, "Oh, what you been doing?" It's like just stuff. It does. I'm not doing it for you, so I don't give a shit what you think,
Right.
really. But yeah, I mean, it's um, I forget what I'm working on or what I've done because there's so many different things all the time.
Hmm.
Um, but yeah, I mean, just love telling stories. So whatever
Yeah.
the best medium is for doing that, like a few years ago, I sold a show to Fox. I wrote uh this show, pitched it. I developed it with Film Roman, who's an animation company.
Hmm.
They
Sure.
did, and so they helped produce this short, um, and then we developed it, and I pitched it, and then we got Andy Samberg attached to be the star, and then Bill Oakley came on, who used to write and produce The Simpsons, and he was going to be the showrunner. And then I got paid well from Fox to write and direct the pilot. All this stuff, it went great, but then we didn't go to series, so I finally got the rights back
Oh,
to it
okay.
now. So maybe we'll do something with it. But that's another thing is like you know um, that show didn't become to fruition ultimately.
Hmm.
So obviously I haven't been doing anything.
No, I mean,
So
well, I'm glad I caught you between naps. Um, yeah, it's. I mean, but it's interesting because I think one, I don't, like back in, in the, hell, in in the '90s when you and I both got into the business, New York City was the center of the comic book industry,
oh yeah.
and so if you went to New York with the idea of getting into comic books, your options are pretty high. There's a lot going on, and what
Yeah.
but if you got out of school and you're in LA, there's we didn't have any film. There's no film in New York City. I mean, films got
Mhm,
done in New
mhm.
York, television, some television, but there really wasn't this. It wasn't generated there. It was being generated out west. So I think
I
the
think if I stayed in LA, I would have gone more in that direction,
yeah.
with because that was the place. And that's kind of like other guys I knew at that same stage in our lives, were like that in New York, like you said, like
Hmm.
with the comics, or guys I know who work in, editorial illustration or advertising and stuff. And then I know people in marketing and advertising that were thriving in places like Chicago or Toronto. And so it just kind of, different places at different things. And then film and all these things end up moving around. Like, all of a sudden, everybody was really busy in Eastern North Carolina making
Right.
TV shows with the
Totally.
tax breaks and everything. And now all that stuff moved to Georgia.
Yep.
And, so there's, people sometimes move with it. I know lots of guys I work with in different crews that I'm moving to Georgia now, or
Yeah.
going to go live in Canada for the summer, or whatever. So
They're like fruit pickers. They're just
yeah, yeah,
they're just following the crop.
yeah.
And listen, it makes sense. You know, I think if you're a kid with a lot of like creative impulses, and you sort of do a lot of different things as a child, whether it's model making or drawing or playing, playing D&D or whatever the things you do, that kind of carries over as an adult into some different versions of that. And because I think if I was like, I think that's what burned me out in comics was I was only thinking about comic books
Yeah, sure.
versus the variety. And then when I stumbled into design, I was like, wait a minute, I don't have to do the same thing over and over again. Like it's gonna be a different client with a different thing. I was like, well, this is great because it changed. Like every time you could take your same creative philosophy and apply it to something new, but it was a completely different project.
And you'd feel a sense of growth again too in yourself.
Yeah.
Like you'd learn a new skill, you'd pick up a new, find a new thing that you liked or realize what you don't like.
Right.
All those kinds of things. And working on all this stuff right before COVID, and then when COVID hit, luckily, Mark came to me with the Jupiter's Legacy comic because all the movies and everything all shut down, and there wasn't anything going on,
Hmm.
and so I was happy to have that and just work on that while everybody was at their house,
Hmm.
and uh, but man, I got really burnt out, and partly because I had just not just career wise, but just in my life, I was yearning for more human contact
Yeah.
and more like collaborative projects and stuff like that. So as soon as I was able to get away from doing Jupiter's Legacy, I I I
You
yeah
did.
decided to get away. Yeah. So
But you are finishing you finishing it up or something like that? Is it
the stuff that's finally coming out is stuff I did a couple years
Oh
ago.
wow. Okay. I thought
Yeah.
I figured like, oh, you were done
I
and then
thought it was done. I saw something about like, oh, coming out this August or whatever, and I was like, what? And yeah, so I thought it all had come out, but there's more that hadn't come out. And yeah, I was into it at first, and I really pushed myself, and
Mhm.
I was basically like painting the book in Photoshop,
Yeah.
just doing full on these full color illustrations, and rather than doing like line and color like I would do on like it was all digital.
Yeah.
So like on Grendel, Kentucky was the other book I did around that time, was all drawn with ink on board, on
Mhm.
paper. It was all traditional. That's the other thing is I'll get bored with something and decide I'm gonna do this digital or I'm gonna do this with ink, and this one I'm gonna it depends on it depends on the story and on the project.
Mhm.
And where Grendel, Kentucky is sort of like an old Warren magazine kind of vibe, like a
Yeah.
creepy and eerie kind of thing. The kind of books we liked when we were kids, and where Jupiter's Legacy was more like felt like a slick kind of modern,
Mhm.
kind of more kind of thing with more glows and more color. But and then at the time they were working on this TV show for Jupiter's Legacy, and and I was thinking, well, this will be good because I knew Gerard was doing well with the Umbrella Academy show,
Mhm.
and that maybe that could help carry over into book sales. But ultimately, that Jupiter's Legacy show was just god awful,
Yeah.
and it got canceled. And they announced that it was canceled before the comic even came out. So all the shops basically put the brakes on ordering a bunch of copies.
Right.
So I don't really know if it really did that well. I know there's lots of fans out there of the series
Mhm.
and the Jupiter's Legacy stuff that came before, and it's a really great script. It's really fun stories.
Yeah, I
Um,
our
but
local
it just
yeah, my local
yeah
shop picked up a bunch of they kept ordering it. So
good.
if I saw your name on it, I'm like, oh, I'll grab it, and I would just, because you always kind of grab your buddy's comic books. You make sure that
Yeah,
like
exactly.
keep them employed. But I think it's interesting you're saying going back between the digital and the traditional is I think that's just like a classic drawing thing. Like I always say, you sort of you'll plateau on anything you're working on. Like after a while, it's like exercise. Like you're going to acclimatize to whatever it is. And I remember, so John Ruggieri. The
Yeah.
yeah, yeah. So
Yeah, of course.
he was my teacher as well. And I remember one day I was just struggling in class. Just the line wasn't there. One of those drawing days, and he just walked over and he just grabbed my pencil or whatever I had in my hand and just reached into my box and pulled something out and just handed to me. He's like, "There you go, go." And and I'm sure he probably was mean and grabbed Vine charcoal or something. And it was one of those things where I realized like what he was doing is saying you need to relearn what you already know as quickly as possible. And that's
Hmm.
what the new tool kind of provided, is that my mind had to solve this problem to be able to, and in the 1 minute pose, like solve it.
Yeah.
You don't have an afternoon. You got to do it now. Um, and I think that's kind of like that healthy thing to be able to jump through it. Now, I don't think it works for everybody how people design their careers. Especially in comic books, because a look is what people typically get hired for. It's very hard
Yeah.
to go, like there's this um, South American artist, um, Sebastian Perez, and he does this very sort of like solid, what people are expecting comic book work from, but like he does all these drawings that he puts up online, and they're insanely good. Like great
Yeah.
coloring, great stuff, super
Yeah.
expressionistic, and I'm like, dude, do this. And he's like, I'm afraid to do this because I don't think they're going to hire me because they're expecting
Yeah.
me to do this one thing. And I'm like, I don't know, man. If you can do a small project in this style and make it work, I think everybody's going to want you to do this stuff.
Yeah, sometimes it's hard to the way I draw my layouts, I have a certain way of drawing that a lot of people always tell me, "Oh, you should do a book like this." And I haven't had the courage to do it yet,
I, I
like
I used to
maybe
yell at
someday.
Howard Porter. Howard's probably as good as a comic book artist can get, right? Like
Oh yeah.
as a monthly dude, tons of detail, tons of stuff. And Howard would show me his layouts. I'm like, do the book like this, because it was so vibrant, and
Yeah.
there were the
A lot
part.
of spontaneity to it.
Yeah, and the parts that were missing, made it look like, like a Mike Mignola drawing, like it wasn't banking on line work to solve the problems. It was shapes. And I
Right.
was like, oh, this is so perfect. And but he, like, I don't blame him. I mean, you're terrified to like try something new if it means you don't eat next month.
Yep.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, I mean, I think that's another thing, like actually a lot of editors in comics would sometimes complain. I've actually literally heard some people say, "Yeah, well, with Tommy, you don't really know what you're
You're
gonna
gonna
get."
get right.
And so it's I haven't gotten that so much, like the last several years, but I used to get that a lot. Like, they wanted, like there's a book I did called Zombie World for Dark Horse a million years ago that Bob Fingerman wrote, and I did there was the first book where I was like, I'm gonna do this all, like it was very Milt Caniff
Hmm.
kind of all brush stuff, and then the next thing I did ended up being more like line driven, and just kind of changed it up, and that the editor on that was like, oh, I was wanting that brush thing,
Hmm.
and I was like, oh well, I'm doing this, and
Right.
that's always, I've always had that, I don't know. I mean, even like when I just finished this Gatchaman cover, I did I did it all traditional
Hmm.
because that's how I think of Gatchaman. I think of it as a traditional, paintings from when I was a kid, stuff that was made in the early 70s. So we didn't see it till late 70s when it came to America, but all that stuff was all very early 70s, even late 60s inspired, and all gouache paintings and stuff. And so when came time to get to draw this stuff, well, I'm not going to do it digitally.
Hmm.
um and so, and I don't know if the editors ever knew if I do it digitally or draw it with ink and color it or paint it. I don't They never asked.
Right.
They just, luckily, hopefully they like all of it. um but like right now, what I have on my desk right now is a loading screen for Fortnite, the video game.
Hmm.
and like that I'm doing digitally, partly because it works really well backlit on a monitor. It's I don't have to think about printing or paper,
Right.
stuff like that. So sometimes that will dictate the medium
Sure.
as well.
Yeah, I mean that's a classic, design approach. It's like, well, what is actually going to be is going to dictate the execution. Like you can't
Yeah.
you can, but really it's a big battle to try to jam a square thing through a round hole if it doesn't fit.
Yeah, I love when I've done some posters for like retro poster like screenings. We did an anniversary screening of The Thing years ago, and it was going to be a so screen poster. So that was like a whole nother like, okay, cool. I'm gonna figure out what's the best way to do that. And in high school, I used to make the screens, and we'd print shirts
Hmm.
and all that stuff. So I know how to you know like you were talking about, knowing the mechanics of it, and yeah, so there right there is like, well, that dictated how I was gonna approach the artwork,
Right.
because I knew I had only so many colors and stuff like that.
Which
So
is it's and I'll say it every time if it's necessary, but it's the limitations that make us better. Plain
oh
and
yeah,
simple. Plain and simple.
yeah, there was one thing I always think of is I did a series of The Question with Rick Veitch back in 2004, and when we first started writing it, we had this whole thing going, and then DC told us it had to take place in Metropolis, and I was like, why? And because they had their reasons, and so and all of a sudden all these limitations came in, and then that ended up steering us towards creating a story that you could only do in Metropolis.
Mm.
And why the question, why do we need the question in Metropolis? They have Superman, and then that dictated our whole story. So sometimes, yeah, those having those limitations, yeah, if you have too many tools, too many possibilities, too much time, all those are real things
Yeah,
that can mess you up.
they're your enemy every
Yeah,
we think
yeah.
of it as a luxury, but they're not. They're working against you at all cost. Um, so what do you think that like I always like look at like my job is always to try to find a smarter, quicker, better way of doing the thing that I do every time I approach it. Like, how do I do this? How do I do that? Like, can you think of something like in the last, I guess, maybe 5-ish years that like you've brought into your work process that has improved what you do?
Mm, Again, it depends on the project, and depends what I'm doing at the moment. Like usually I do my writing work at night. It's like a different muscle that I
Hmm.
can do. Like uh, I'm so tired of drawing and talking to people all day, and that which is funny because now the past 2 years as creative director of this company, I'm like talking and giving people direction all the time, and that's probably a skill that grows with experience.
Hmm.
And one thing that I've always struggled with, and always will struggle with, is how to delegate to other people, um, and how to trust
Yeah.
other people. I mean, like I was just saying, like John letters everything I do in comics. Like I have to color everything. There were some times here and there when my wife, colored some stuff, early on. I have to. Like on Gatchaman, they did a logo I didn't like, so I'm like, I have to do the logo for the book, so it's that kind of like I have a really hard time letting go. And So if I can put together my team and I have my trusted people, I'm in really great shape,
Hmm.
and I'm really able to let go and say, okay, cool, like Sloan's got this, David's got that, like blah, 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 and but then other times when you don't have that team that you've put together, sometimes you have to work with an author or
Hmm.
a game studio or a modeler, or all these different kinds of things that you didn't hand pick. You have to figure out how to recognize what can they do, and try and hopefully bring the best out of them.
Hmm.
And so that is something I've learned to do better. It doesn't really apply so much to comics, but it applies a lot to all my other work as far as like how I can, delegate. And sometimes it doesn't work out,
Yeah.
obviously, but but I think that has helped me in ways where I can, be more efficient, and how to, get stuff done and, kind of make choices and have to move things along, which we all have to do in every single job. Especially, I mean, there's no page that we're ever fully happy with or a story you're ever fully happy
No.
with because you've had to make a compromise because you have to get it in and get paid and meet the schedule and blah blah blah. So
No,
so sometimes learning to let go a little bit is something that I'm always trying
yeah.
to learn how to do.
No, thank God they take this stuff away from us, because
Yeah.
because we would just be working on the same group of pages or the same design forever if we were left to our own devices.
Yeah.
If the checks kept coming in and nobody questioned it, we would just keep working on the same thing till it was perfect.
Yeah. Yeah.
Which, by the way, it'll never be perfect. Just so
No.
we are clear on that. Um, so, Gatchaman, how did that come together? I mean, and you are sort of kind of being a bit of a creative director in this one, aren't you?
Yeah, I don't mean to be. I'm not, and I even told the editor like thanks for putting up with me, and thanks for um, just even I saw some promotion for the book yesterday, and they didn't use something exactly the right way in my opinion, and I contacted the people and everything, and and I can, yeah, I have to sort of like, and my wife reminds me, Tommy, you're just supposed to be writing this thing,
Hmm.
and but I can't help it, um and because I think about how good it can be from all aspects, and I would love to draw this stuff, but I don't have the
Right.
time.
Right.
So, and I love being able to. So, therefore, I'm thinking, well, who can I work with that whose work that I really love that I can trust? It all again goes to that trust thing,
Hmm.
and then how can I, uh, because I want to be proud of it. Like they had a logo on the book that I didn't like, and I knew that okay, I would have to show this thing and cringe every time I showed anybody the book.
Right.
And that's what you're always fighting against
Hmm.
is how can, and that, not that the logo was bad, it just wasn't right for the book in my opinion. So uh so it's a lot of like, so the way it came about was Mark Irwin, who is at Mad Cave Publishing.
The wonderful Mark Irwin. Yes.
Yeah. And he was an art director at Mad Cave, and his role has expanded a lot as the company has grown. And he contacted me knowing the kind of stuff that I like, wondering if I'd want to do artwork. And I said I would love to draw Gatchaman, but I'm way more interested in writing it. And I hadn't written a lot of comics. I wrote a book called Vandroid for Dark Horse, and wrote a Batman short, and I helped craft and come up with the Mother Panic series with Gerard Way. And I was set to write and draw like a whole arc, and when they canceled the book, um, and then I've written a lot of screenplays, and animation stuff, and so there's a lot of stuff that like people have never seen, like the show I wrote
Hmm.
and for Fox. So a lot of guys in comics, like a Mark or an editor or something, might go, "Oh, you want to write stuff?" Because they didn't quite know that. So I just decided I really need to just start making that more known,
Hmm.
and so I just said, "Yeah, I really want to write it," and I just kind of if I was offered to write like X-Men or Batman or whatever, I would have no clue what to do.
Hmm.
This is one of those few existing properties that I knew exactly, like you mentioned Ultraman earlier and stuff like I know exactly how to do this.
Yeah.
I felt I had that confidence level, and that I was able to say, yes, I can do this. And then I basically just pitched why and what I would like to do. And they had two writers already, and one is uh, Steve Orlando.
Hmm.
Another one is Cullen
Yeah,
Bunn,
Colin.
and they're Cullen's going to be doing the monthly book,
Hmm.
and which is I'm like great because I can't do a monthly book. And then Steve is doing kind of what I'm doing. They want to do a lot of stuff, so this was ended up being kind of perfect where we've got the three of us hit it off, and we basically have like a writing room kind of thing where we map out what we want to do, and and then basically because I know the Japanese show so well, the Japanese version of it.
Hmm.
Um, and Tatsunoko, that owns Gatchaman, that made the show, they want us to work within the first 105 episodes of the show, which is the classic show. And at first, I was bummed out about that a little bit. I wanted to do like what Hideaki Anno did with Shin Godzilla or Shin Ultraman or Shin Kamen Rider and stay true to it, but how can we update it,
Hmm.
and make it like my big thing was now as an adult, I wanted reasons for things.
What?
Like yeah. So which is so fun. And that's kind of what like Ano did with those things. Like why do they wear these helmets?
Hmm.
Why is it a bird? Why is it so dangerous to go into Phoenix fire form that the ship does?
Right.
All this stuff. Like when you're a kid, you just accept, oh, these guys want to take over the world. They're bad guys, like Cobra, like Galactor.
Sure.
As an adult, you're like, well, wouldn't it be so cool to give them a reason? Um, and why people follow them, stuff like that.
Yeah.
So I was excited about that, and so they didn't completely shoot that down, but just like the Rick Veitch story I told about the question, they said like I originally wrote a story idea of how Ken and Joe first meet. So two of the main
Hmm.
characters in Gatchaman, how they first met, and that idea got shot down immediately because they want us to stay within. Steve calls it dancing within the raindrops of basically we have certain things that happen in the show, certain characters, but man, we're really pushing the envelope. Like I'm constantly being told no, we can't do that, but then I'm told yes, we can on so much awesome stuff.
Hmm.
So we've created all kinds of new characters. Um, so I knew I wanted to create a lot of new characters for what's called Ken. I wanted to call it G1 because each character has G1 through
Right.
5. But they decided that we should do their names, Ken, Joe, Ryu, Jinpei, and June. So I'm writing Ken, Jinpei, and June,
Okay.
and then so 3 of the books, um, and then Steve's writing Ryu, Joe, and then he's doing one on Dr. Nambu, the guy that runs
Hmm.
the Gatchaman. So, and this is so we have 2 years of stuff planned out. So it's a lot of stuff, and it's kind of a perfect amount for me. It's a lot of work, but it's
Hmm.
not like undoable with my other jobs. So primarily my main job, and then like little illustration jobs and stuff like this. So and it keeps me doing some comic stuff,
Hmm.
and then I get to do the covers,
And something you
and
love.
just yeah. So and oh man, I just all I do like for work now is watch Gotcha Man, and I have to buy the toys because it helps me with
Well,
reference.
duh.
And so and I knew that I couldn't draw it, but who do I love working with already, or that I'm friends with that I've always wanted to work with. So Mindy Lee has worked for me at Atmos, working on game design stuff and animation design, and I've always wanted to see more comic stuff from her. And
Hmm.
she's done some great comic stuff as well for like Dark Horse and DC, and especially when I knew that I wanted to tell a story that we made a lot of new characters.
Right.
Um, One of her strengths is character design, and so she designed. I just basically wrote character descriptions of 10 new characters,
Hmm.
plus more like 11 because actually more like 12 because there's one character who's not new, but they're another character in
Oh,
disguise. I
okay.
don't want to spoil it. And then there's a disguise that Ken wears in the book.
Is that
So there's
that's the sheet you sent me, like with all the character line?
yeah,
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Okay, cool.
those are all new characters
Yeah,
that
no,
I
I'm like,
wrote.
well, it makes sense. Like, you need to flesh out the world of these characters. Like,
Yeah.
having these characters just interact with one another.
And then I think
Ugh,
they again, I don't want to ruin it, but I could kill all of them if I wanted to
okay,
also. Because and actually that's even better for Tatsunoko because they don't have to worry about, well, where do they fit in the lore
right.
in the other stuff,
Yeah.
you know? So for me it's kind of like where when I think of my job as, yeah, creative director or production designer, or you put together a team, you figure out who's great at what.
Hmm.
So the June one that I finished writing that script, and these are 32-page one shots. So and then I'm writing a couple different 4-issue miniseries. One was going to be that story that they shot down about how Joe and Ken first meet. So I'm actually struggling to re think it, you know.
Right.
And then there's a short. We all wrote short stories that come out next month on Free Comic Book Day. We have Gatchaman number 0, and that one, there's a guy, Daniel Hansen,
Hmm.
that I've only known online, and you know
Well,
Daniel.
that's where I was super curious because
Yeah,
I had Daniel on as a
that's
guest
crazy.
two
Yeah,
and a half years ago,
yeah,
and he was a guy, he does had all this art, and he just kept liking all the episode stuff, and I'm like, who is this dude? So I started looking at his
yeah,
work. I'm like, oh, he's really, really good and talented and
yeah,
prolific, to say the least. and
yeah,
and then so I had him on the show, and he's like, I don't know why you want me on the show because I haven't done comic books yet. I'm like, well, it's not just specifically comic books, it's about creative process and journey. And so he did finally, his first book last year came out,
yeah,
and he's great, and he's great.
yeah.
So when I saw him say, he did the drawing online, I'm like, well, wait a minute, how is this, what is, and that's when I reached out to you, and you're like, oh well, yeah, and I'm like, all right. So
Yeah, I approached him about doing Gotcha Man. So he was going to do one of the mini series, but I think it's maybe a bit more of a heavy workload than I think Daniel was anticipating,
mhm.
or at least, or maybe he's trying to fit in other things or whatever. But I think he's going to end up drawing the Jinpei one shot,
Oh,
32
cool.
page. So he's going to do that along with the one he's already done, which is the. What's cool is when I'm writing these, I have the artists in mind, like Mindy for Deathmatch, um, and then and Daniel. There's something about Daniel's work that you can tell, even if he's not inspired by, he must like Toth's work.
Oh yeah.
So so I used a lot of the old, frontline combat and Two Fisted Tales, Toth stuff, and like the old like Saber Jet and all those things as inspiration, for our story. It's only 6 pages, and there's
Hmm.
not a whole lot you can do there. Right there, the format works as far as those old, EC stories, but also it's it's all aviation stuff. So
Hmm.
it's Ken and Jet, which I loved when I was a kid,
Oh
and
my
I have
god,
a toy of it, of
they were the
course.
best.
Yeah, that and Red
Oh,
Impulse also.
the red jets, like when that crew would show up, like, in a
Yeah,
formation, it was like, oh, this is the best.
yeah, exactly. So this is Ken. He's been shot. He's in the final stages of a big giant battle with Galactor, and he has to. And we're not sure if he's going to be able to make it back to base. And then Red Impulse shows up to help him make it back to base. And uh, fans of Gatchaman will know what Red Impulse means to Ken,
Hmm.
and what how their characters, what they mean to each other. New readers will also be like, "Oh, this is cool. There's something up with these guys."
Hmm.
But longtime fans and people who are into the stuff will be like, oh, dude, this is great because they know something that maybe other people don't.
Yeah.
So I'm writing this stuff for the fans,
Hmm.
but also obviously you don't have to know anything to enjoy the story. And then Eric Canetti is drawing the June one shot.
Dude, that's so great.
Yeah, and Eric is one of my longtime good friends, and his work is amazing.
Hmm.
And my June story is all motorcycles. I mean, obviously, her vehicle is a motorcycle, and I ride motorcycles and love motorcycles, and and I love Kamen Rider, and I try not to get too much inspiration from Kamen Rider, but there's a lot of it's motorcycles, it's it's got cyborgs, it's got a lot of that kind of stuff. And again, like as I'm writing certain scenes, I'm just thinking about Eric drawing it,
Hmm.
and what I think are his strengths, and what as a fan I want to see him draw.
Totally.
So my scripts are very very descriptive and very very full.
Hmm.
But they're really just as inspiration, for such great artists that they're going to do all the heavy lifting.
They were great. I mean, and thank you for sharing them because I really enjoyed reading them. I love
Oh,
reading.
cool, man.
I love reading how other people write their scripts, because I write my scripts and, and I love getting to read how other people do it and having the one with Daniel's artwork to be able to compare. Like I will literally went panel to panel, but like, okay, what did he do? What did he think about?
Oh, cool.
And, and then like I got scared thinking about how every time I got a script coming in when I was younger drawing comics, I'm like, because there's all this pressure to really land every single, page. But it was really cool. And I like how you describe everything. It's very clear and but it's not directive in the terms of like, put this here, put this here, put this here.
Mhm.
You're giving the frame shot, the frame size, and then you're giving the information in a clear fashion that it isn't, problematic if someone who wants to have a little creativity, in the game.
Yeah, there's certain rules I think you have to stay with, uh, that I apply to my own drawings,
Hmm.
even if they're not in the script. I put them in the script. Like every page has to have a establishing shot, a master shot, things. So when I'm writing, I think of, okay, I got to make sure that I provide the place for the artist to be able to put that there. I mean, you probably will notice I'll put like wide or establishing shot, or something like
Hmm.
that. Or um, what I hate is when artists or the writer usually will make that the first shot. I like to reveal things a
Mm,
lot of times, so
yeah.
we'll start on something close, and then we eventually pull back, and then you see like what's happening. But again, it's all about what's important in the story. So but yeah, I think, and then having a full script is important, all the dialogue and everything, so that you can fully execute the acting of the
Hmm.
characters. You know how much space to leave for the balloons. You know where I have all the sound effects are in there. You
Yeah.
know how to incorporate that into the design of your panel, into your page. And John Workman can really think about it too. Like John has the lettering kind of like when when the thing's already been penciled or laid out. He's got the script, and he can kind of think ahead and see what's happening.
Mm.
So the lettering he's done on the Ken one shot is really great, 'cause it's very incorporated into the art.
It is.
It's not
It looks
it's not
like.
just slapped on.
Yeah, yeah. It was like one of those things where you go, oh, because I mean, I don't know about you, but I used to love drawing in like sound effects. Even though
Yeah,
it wasn't my job, it was just a lot of fun to design it into the page. And
I like to design it and let John do it.
right, yeah. And that's but like everything was super well incorporated into all the action. So yeah.
Yeah, it's I'm I just yeah, it's been great. And the like I said, the Mad Cave has been so supportive, and for one, giving me the chance to, for like when Mark first contacted me, and then getting to talk to everyone else at the company, and for them to say, oh yeah, maybe they didn't have to say, well, but you draw comics, you don't
Right.
write it, or whatever, or just like all the other things I've talked about, where well, you were in animation, not live action, or you do this chiaroscuro type stuff, not colorful stuff. And then I mean, people don't know that I've designed kids shows. I designed a movie called Nomeo and Juliet. No, the sequel called Sherlock Gnomes,
Okay.
which is a ridiculous
Yeah.
kids movie, but the director I like working with, and so I designed the stuff.
Mm-hmm.
So it I've designed princess uh, shirts for Disney.
Right.
You know, so each thing I do it my way, and it looks like my work. But
Mm-hmm.
I can adapt to speaking of Casey Jones, he was working on some stuff at Disney, and they wanted some very like kind of sumi brush style kind of stuff for adult apparel. And sometimes you're like, oh yeah, let's figure out how to do that. And so there's different ways to approach everything.
Yeah.
But anyway.
No, I think, listen, I think it's amazing. I mean, I one of my greatest creative lament is my first gig was a penciling gig, which is what I was aiming for at Marvel right out of school. But the schedule, that there was no script yet. Had to wait for a
Mm,
script. So I went around trying to get more work, and nobody would give me any work. So I ended up going into an editor's office and convinced them, you know, to agree to buy a script from me if I, if the caveat was it had to be good. But I like, if you bought it, can I draw it? And they were like, yeah. And I didn't learn
ah,
the lesson. Like I didn't realize like all I had to do was just keep hustling in that direction. I was thinking
mm,
I just want to draw comic books.
yeah.
And it's so funny because my mentor was always like, hey, like your job is to make the best comic book or the best thing, whatever you're doing is possible. And if that means you have to like rewrite the story structure, do it. Like make everything work the best way. And I just didn't really put it all together because I thought, oh, I just want to draw comic books. Like that was all I thought was the important thing. But as time goes on, I'm like, all I want to do is tell these stories, and I don't care what
Yeah.
the outlet is. And so I get the joy of writing it, because it is this free. It is the biggest blank canvas you can possibly have.
Hmm. Yeah, there's not like when I'm working on a movie or an animated TV show, there's budget constraints. There's all these things that you don't have in a comic.
Hmm.
So it's, yeah, the sky's the limit.
Yeah.
uh with but in the sense that when I work on that stuff, and I get to put together a team, that's kind of what I'm enjoying on Gatchaman. Is not only not just writing a script and handing it in and walking away. I'm lucky enough that Mad Cave is cool with me going, so like, I can't do anything like part way,
Hmm.
um and luckily, you know they're not like, oh, we don't like when I sent them Daniel's work to do the short,
Hmm.
they responded, and we're like, yeah, great. I mean, I'm not sending them crappy art,
Right.
so at least got that going for it. But but they hadn't worked with him. They
Hmm.
hadn't worked with Mindy before. They I think they knew their work, or they knew like Eric Canetti's work, but it's like, so I think I can bring some of the, it's sort of with my game stuff, or if I'm working on a movie or something where I do get to put together a team, uh, the other artists will want to work on it because they know I'm going to be,
Hmm.
you know, getting to direct them on it. So, because I've been on their side all the time. So that's when I'm writing the script, I think about what, what script do I wish was given to me?
Yeah.
Uh,
I love that.
what kind of freedom do I wish I had? What kind of direction do I wish I had? What kind of clarity do I wish I had that I don't often get?
Hmm.
So, and I feel like the more ideas, the better, because you can always edit them out.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah. Totally.
um, so it's all just inspiration.
Hmm.
Um, and the best ideas are hopefully going to rise to the top, and then you kind of get trim the fat.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I mean,
Like
usually,
like when you're writing, you go,
yeah,
okay, you write and you write this crazy dirty draft and you throw everything in there and then you go, all right, this is ridiculous. I
yeah.
gotta start trimming now.
Cannot possibly have all this in here. No one's going to
Yeah,
print it if it is. Yeah,
yeah.
that's. I mean, that really is the whole thing. I mean, it's so cool. I mean, I'm just like the biggest, you know, cheerleader for so many, artists to write their stuff. And it's not that I'm
Hmm.
knocking writers because I don't really draw anymore. So I guess I'm in that camp. But I just think of how much story I wanted to tell,
Hmm.
but I didn't have the freaking guts to do that. And the greatest satisfactions I ever had were the times that I actually did that. So it's one of these things where I just constantly say to, just try it. I know it's scary. I know dialogue is dreadful when you first give it a run, but don't be afraid. Just tackle it because the end result super satisfying.
Oh yeah. And um that is like where my goals are is I whatever my next comic is that I draw is going to be all me.
Hmm.
So I don't know when or where that exactly is going to be, but I have a few different things that I want to do. One is a little intimidating because it's kind of massive, but another one I have is a little simpler. So yeah, so we'll see. For now, I'm just kind of like happy doing, this, the writing, the Gatchamans, and there's a little bit of like business stuff too, where I'm thinking maybe before I come out with my own book,
Hmm.
I'll have a bit more writing under my belt for retailers and people like that to go, oh yeah, that's the guy that wrote Gatchamans,
Right. Because
not
like,
just the guy that drew,
right.
you know,
Wait,
Mother Panic.
don't you just draw? Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I know.
So there was a little bit of that in my brain as I'm trying to think ahead.
Yeah.
So for when I do, whether it's I chip away at it while I'm working on the game stuff,
Hmm.
or maybe it's something I do when I'm done with this. If I get tired of this, or the company goes down, or you never
Sure.
know,
You don't know.
all those kinds of things. So you got to be thinking ahead a little bit on what your next move might have to be.
Yeah, yeah, it doesn't, yeah, exactly. Just have a bunch of option maps laid out that you
Yeah,
can just grab and when the
and to have options is such
it's a luxury.
oh yeah, man. I mean,
But
it's
you create that luxury. That luxury just doesn't they don't hand the luxuries out. Like you have to pay the dues to get the luxuries.
yeah. At the same time, like yeah, like, I think if we, I don't want to take it for granted, because we've always been in those
Mhm.
places where all of a sudden, oh, there's nothing going on, or there's nothing to
It's
do,
the
or
worst feeling.
so yeah, so we've all been there as
Yeah.
freelancers, and so I mean, I made a conscious choice 2 years ago to take this salary job, so
Mhm.
I'm able to do certain things that as a freelancer were harder to do, like go to Japan or to build a hobby house.
Mhm.
But now, but then maybe in another year, I might decide I don't really need that right now. I really feel creatively like I'm gonna, blah blah blah, do this other thing, or go work on a movie, or do my own comic or whatever. So
I mean,
I don't know.
isn't that the
Figure it
battle?
out.
That's the battle, man. It's the battle is between getting to play with other people's toys, which is great, but making your own toys is also pretty damn good.
Yeah. And getting, well, the battle has always been for everybody is making your own toys and getting to play with your own toys, but making a living while you get to play with your own toys.
Right.
That's the hard part.
That is
So
that is
that's everyone's dream.
yeah.
So everyone's dream is to get to do what you know Mike Mignola or Robert Kirkman or Frank Miller or all these guys who get to come up with their own stuff and make it a reality.
Yeah.
So that's and now that like my kids are you know mostly self-reliant now, they're in their 20s
Mhm.
and things like that, and there aren't things that you can sort of focus more on things that you've always wanted to do, whether that be working on cars or doing your own comic,
Yeah.
So that I'm kind of at that stage right now where I'm, wanting to kind of figure out what's important for me to chip away at now.
You got to keep it interesting. That's the if it's not interesting, it's I don't know why we do it. Just go back to Burger King and flip burgers. You know?
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, I that's kind of how I feel. So when does Gatchaman come out for? Do you know, like when the world, or do I have to go bug Mark?
I think, well, issue the free comic book day is
Fourth.
yeah, May 4th,
Mm-hmm.
and I'm going to do a signing in North Carolina at Ultimate Comics in Cary, and actually Cullen and Steve are coming as well, so there'll be all the
Wow.
Gotchaman writers together. um and that's Alan Gill who owns those shops. I used to co-own the North Carolina Comic Con and run that convention with him in Durham. I don't have the bandwidth for that anymore. So, but we're always, helping each other and supporting each other, for the, anything we can do with our local community. So, so I'm going to do that. And then I think in June, I'm pretty sure that's when, Ken comes out.
Okay.
My first one shot, and the monthly Gotcha Man, which is, Colin and, Chris Batista is drawing that.
Sure.
And Chris is a I didn't know Chris, before this, and he was like born to draw Gotcha Man. It's crazy.
Dude,
Like he's
Chris
been
is
a fan since
he's been
yeah.
so Chris went to SVA with us. He was I think he
Oh,
might have
cool.
been like a year behind me or a year before JP, like somewhere in between JP and myself.
Yeah.
And yeah, Chris, I think even back then was pitching Gotcha Men left and right.
Yeah. Oh my God. So this is kind of perfect, and way better him to get to do this than if he did the Battle of the Planets version of stuff, which obviously that's what most of us know more anyway, but I think he's really well suited for the original, Tatsunoko version of the stuff, because it's more mature, it's
Mm-hmm.
more sophisticated. There's more stuff you can do as far as, uh, action and violence, and
Yep.
stuff that obviously you couldn't do on television, um, when we were kids in America. Um, but yeah, so he's doing that, and it's cool because we're gonna get like a bunch of different versions of Gotcha Man stuff. So, um, but we're all super fans, so it's pretty awesome.
Yeah. Which is
So
great.
when we all sit around and talk about it, it's like, oh, dude, what if you did this? Or there are some characters that Cullen is introducing that are new, that one of them spins off into the second mini series that I'm writing.
Oh, okay.
So it's that kind of stuff that we're trying to do. Like, Steve is gonna do a Red Impulse story. Um, there's certain things that we'll through communicating with each other, we'll come up with ideas and give each other ideas on how we can kind of bridge the gaps and make sure, oh, do you know this episode or that episode, and
Mm-hmm.
maybe there's a way to tie those in together, or maybe those characters that we're creating are an early version of this or that we saw in the show, or did that character really die in that episode? Maybe we get to do something with them in the comic. So there's like so much cool inspiration. Yeah, it's great, man.
It,
A few years ago, I wrote a GI Joe project that Hasbro shut down. IDW signed on. We're all set to do it, and I was gonna draw it, and David Gianfelice was gonna draw it. I was gonna write it, and so I had it all written, and we were ready to start. And Hasbro decided it was too retro.
oh,
This was at the time when they were like, they had done the one with The Rock, and they were trying to do the Snake Eyes live action movie,
right.
and they're really trying to push the stuff more into, you know something that for a lot of old time fans didn't feel like GI Joe. So I'm kind of getting to do a little bit with Gotcha Man what I wanted to do with GI Joe, kind of like just do the stuff that we really loved,
Yeah.
um, and stay true to it. But at the same time, there's some stuff that you can do to make it a little more, like I said, have some reasons behind some stuff, add a little bit of, and stuff also like that you couldn't do back in the day. If you wanted to do uh stories that deal with, LGBTQ stuff in
Hmm.
a Gotcha thing. Like you could do that now. You
Yeah.
could do, stuff that you couldn't do in the early 70s, So although the main bad guy
Hmm.
is Bird Katse, who's very the most gender bending villain of all.
Of course.
Um, is a big part of the story that I do with Mindy, the Ken story.
That's cool.
So there's some fun Bird Katse stuff in there.
That's very cool. Yeah, that was always
Yeah,
a
there's a whole Galactor series
yeah.
that Steve is doing. So pretty cool.
Yeah, no, I mean when we were kids we're like, wait a minute. So
Yeah, yeah.
it was that's a lot of lip gloss. Let's just leave it there.
And in the American version, they edited the hell out of that stuff to try and work their way around it.
Oh, really? Okay. Well,
Yeah,
I still picked up on it as a 10-year
yeah.
old.
And in the Japanese one, it's very clearly not different people. When you'd see other people,
Mm-hmm.
it was the same person, different genders.
That's well.
So
They just
yeah,
they underestimated us for so long.
yeah. And I think that in it's amazing to watch the stuff they did in this show 50 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, character wise, and some of the animation techniques blow me away. Some of the color design, like it's super inspiring. So
I used to get up at 7. I used to get up at 6 o'clock in the morning, and they played our reruns of Battle of the Planets at 6:30 in the morning where I lived. So I would
man,
get up and I would do whatever I needed to do between that to 6:30. I'd watch the half-hour show, then have breakfast and go to school. And one morning I just woke up on the couch. The TV was off. I'd woken up and walked from my bedroom to the
to
TV
your
room
sleep.
and went to sleep, back to sleep on the couch. I just slept walk in there. That's how obsessed I was with that show as a kid. It was worth getting up for.
Yeah,
All right, man. Well, I'll let you go. This is super exciting. Obviously, super nerdy, exciting stuff. So I'm super
yeah.
excited, and we'll have to chat some more, I guess, when everything comes out. Are you going to show up to the Heroes this year? You think?
Yes, I will go to Heroes Con. I'm actually gonna set up this year.
Damn. All right. Good. Now I know where to put my stuff when I walk around.
Yeah. So I'm actually gonna set up. I haven't had the chance to do that in a few
Oh,
years.
good.
So yeah, usually I show up and I walk around just to visit everybody, but this year I'm gonna be there the whole time.
Right on, man.
And then yeah, because every you know the Ken thing will come out, and then a few months after that, or the June one will come out,
Mm-hmm.
and then a little while after that, then my miniseries will come out, and
It's
then
good timing.
and yeah, and apparently the Jupiter's Legacy stuff is going to be coming out, so
You're a big
so
time
yeah,
comic book guy now. That's what happened, out of the
right,
blue.
right, yeah,
Well, that's great, man. I'm super pumped, and I can't wait to actually see the things in hand versus on screen.
yeah.
Yeah,
I got the Free Comic Book Day one in my hands, and it feels good.
nice, nice. That's awesome. Well, mon frere, you good? This
Yeah, man.
took us a while to get this done, but I'm glad that we sat down.
Yeah, same here. It was really cool, man.
Yeah.
I appreciate it. You did a great job interviewing.
Oh, well, I don't know about that. I like to talk.
Well, at least I feel like we're just having a nice chat, which is good.